there was also a plugin that you had to use back in the day, and this is obviously, thank God, has been fixed or improved upon. You would have to use a post CSS plugin called Purge CSS to do something. And also, a big criticism that I've heard from Tailwind haters, which I think they're all wrong, but whatever, let's be objective about it, is that Tailwind generates one class name per rule. Right, so like flex is only display flex. There's nothing more in that declaration. Grid is display grid, and so on and so forth. So it's like one class name. So some people who maybe aren't as familiar with the concept of atomic CSS or Tailwind or utility classes, they criticize Tailwind saying that's a massive CSS file. It's megabyte. How can you ship megabytes of CSS to your users? What's an appropriate response to that?
The response to that is the larger projects that you're using, right? Now you're literally using Flex on all your elements. Okay, so let's say you have 100 elements where you're using Flex, which is not huge. 100 is because these days, we use Flex for everything. Back in those days, I don't know how we worked without it, but now that it's available, even for vertical elements, we use Flex call, for icons, for everything. So let's say for 100 elements, you're using the class Flex. Okay. And that rule is in style sheet, it is generated only once. Okay. But let's say you have 100 elements. In your style sheet, you have 100 elements and there's that display flex rule 100 times. So how do you say that, that is okay and this is not? So eventually, if you look at the entire project and you look at the style sheet, it kind of evens out, and most huge projects also have CSS files which are less than 10 KB. That's because, of this. This is the way I explained. I don't know how to explain it better than that, but it's not how you think it will happen. Like, even if it's one rule, you're using that rule in multiple places. So you're eventually reducing the style sheet itself, not increasing it.
I love this because it makes the case for Tailwind CSS to be also, like, outside of just convenience. We already talked about, for example, context switching and naming and the base reset styles. Outside of these developer conveniences, there's also end user conveniences because it, in theory, or actually not in theory, in practice, ships less code than traditional CSS because of what you mentioned. Because typically in an application, if you have 100 different classes that have a rule display flex, then you ship that line display flex 100 times more than you need to. Whereas with Tailwind CSS and utility classes, that rule display flex is shipped once. That's like a 100x improvement in how much code you ship.
Not exactly. You're still writing flex in HTML, but still, yeah.
Right.
Somewhat,
Yeah. Right. Fair. Yeah, you're right. So that's 4 bytes for every how many ever display flex. Yeah, good. Thank you for correcting that. There's also this thing that Tailwind used to do where it would, as part of the post CSS process, it would read your source code and look at the class names you're using, and then from that big final generated CSS file, it would just remove classes you're not using as a build optimization. Is that still the case? How does that impact performance? I mean, obviously positively, probably, right? Because it removes a bunch of unused stuff.
So that was back in version 2 point something. Tailwind CSS had these, tens of thousands of class names, fixed class names, like every single class name that you see in the documentation. All of this was there. So in your development, you would take that entire thing and just use the ones that you need. And you had to actually purge them for production. So your production style sheet would be different from your development one, right? And that was back then. Then came the just-in-time compiler. So what just-in-time does is it doesn't give you that entire style sheet when you develop. The only styles it generates are the one that are there in your source code from the beginning, in development itself. So your development style sheet is same as the one as production. And then this just-in-time compiler became the default from version 3 onwards. So people who are using Tailwind version 3 onwards don't even know what this purge thing is. So if
And
they
they
come
shouldn't.
across this, yeah, they don't need to. If they come across this in blog posts or videos, they might really wonder, oh, do I have to do this? That means, because they see the discussion, right? And the discussion is like, Tailwind, if you don't purge, you get like this huge
Yeah.
style sheet. And they probably are still under that impression. But no, Tailwind generates only those styles that are there from the beginning. Yeah.
This is so cool. I think there's a big engineering optimization performance idea here that a lot of developers can extract and take away. This is a really, and I want everybody to sort of listen to this, right? And you can tell me, Shruti, if this is appropriate or accurate. But what I'm hearing is, so in version 2, Tailwind did this thing where they generate a bunch of CSS, step 1, like a big CSS file, and then read the source code, the classes you use, and then basically remove the classes that are not used from this big CSS. That was version 2.
It's called tree shaking.
And then with the just-in-time compiler in version 3, right, exactly. And in version 3, what they do with this JIT or just-in-time compiler is instead of that flow, they start with not generating a big bundle, but they start with reading your code. Because they're going to read your code anyway, and in version 2, they were doing it after. But now if you do it first, you can look at all the class names and then only generate the class names that are used. So it's not removing anything, it's actually an additive process. Is that accurate?
Yes,
that
that's
is so
accurate.
cool.
And if I may add something here, that gave them
Of course.
so in version 2, what if you needed these extra colors, like the default was gray, and then there was red, and there was orange, and all of those. But now you can use all the colors like slate and stone, amber, fuchsia, all of these by default. You don't have to add them in your config. Earlier you had to add them in your config, all these, to use all these new colors. Because imagine shipping that huge a bundle, right? You can't download, you can't put that entire thing in development. It'll slow down your development, right? So now, because of this JIT thing, they are able to give us a lot more utility classes without the developer having to even know that, they have to add them or something like this.
That's so cool. There should be a class like Amber, but Ambur, and it's just the color of biryani. Oh my gosh, that would be so cool. I think another consequence of this JIT that we're talking about is the ability to do something like text dash square brackets hex code, right? And that's because it's just in time. It can literally just generate that on the fly.
Yes,
That
exactly.
is so cool. Amazing. It's just, the innovation blows my mind. To go from tree shaking to, look, we're going to read the source code anyway, so instead of reading the source code after generating, you just read the source code before. Man, that's just, it blows my mind how cool that was. And again, I hope this is open and that discussion will be fun to even follow after the fact. Like, we've had it for, I think, years now, but to see how it's done, right? And I think that's the beauty of open source. Cool. So in code, you can still, like, so for example, JavaScript is super, super optimized. Like, the engines are, they're optimized to the point where it's very difficult oftentimes to like de-opt yourself in JavaScript, meaning to do something that's going to make the engine do more work than necessary and be slower. But people still do it. Also in React, for example, they try to make it easy to make performant applications, but sometimes in an effort to optimize your code, you end up de-optimizing your code, meaning you'll cause like unnecessary memory allocation. In the case of imports, sometimes you can import modules in a way that doesn't allow tree shaking, so you like de-opt yourself, you de-optimize. In Tailwind, with the JIT, with all of this, are there still ways that developers should know about that they may be de-optimizing their code? And if yes, what can they do to help that?
Maybe not de-optimizing, but one thing they need to know is their class names will not be discovered if they are broken. For example, let's say you add a BG somewhere in your, let's say you have a React component or something, and then you're saying that, class name is BG hyphen, and then if this is success, then green 500, or, else, let's say red 500. Something like that. So those classes are broken there in the code, in the source code, right? Tailwind will not be able to discover them. they have to be completely BG green 500, BG red 500, because Tailwind does that pattern matching. So for Tailwind, green 500 is not a class name. BG green 500 is. So if you're going to have your class names like conditional classes or something, or wherever else, you can totally have them in your JS files, but they have to be full. They have to be the entire class name. Don't split them anywhere. Probably that's the only thing they need to know. Yeah, there's no way you can, maybe de-optimize. I don't think there's a way. Yeah.
Yeah. By broken, you mean broken by space. So they have to be like one consistent string, right?
Yeah, not just space, like in different lines. Like, you put a variable like class equals BG, and then you append green 500 and you append something. So in the, Tailwind scans the file and it can't find the entire class name. So then it would be available.
That's super.
Yeah.